The government and government-controlled enterprises which make up the public sector are a critical component of nationhood, and therefore reform, as it when needed and agreed on by all, and even more importantly, implemented, is the core of the Aigemokade Foundation's recent discourse on public sector reform. That's our focus on Special Report. The necessity for public sector reform and how to drive it in the right direction with catalysts for impact forms part of the discourse from the Aigemokade Foundation. On the back heels of research on the subject matter as tools for positive growth.
I'd like to welcome everybody very warmly, and to do this,
thematic direction forms a good base for the conversations, which in this case is why many reforms fail in Nigeria and what can we do about it.
It was one of the reasons given by the Murtala Mohammed regime when they ordered the repurge of the civil service in 1975. Okay.
The attendees include former President Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, 7 ministers and former ministers, captains of industry, stakeholders, and other prominent personalities. The chairman of the foundation begins by referring to the Nigerian Constitution as one of the points of reference for the building blocks of the discourse.
I want to begin by calling our attention to Chapter 2 of the 1999 Nigerian Constitution. This chapter contains the fundamental objectives and directive principles of Nigerian state policy. I will only read the opening sentence of Section 13. It says, "It shall be the duty and responsibility of all organs of government and of all authorities and persons exercising legislative, executive, or judicial powers to conform to, observe, and apply the provisions of this chapter of this Constitution." These are very, very powerful and weighty mandates, fundamental actually to the principles that direct us either as citizens of this state called Nigeria or as officers of this state called Nigeria. Now, sections 13 to 24 of our Constitution make up Chapter 2. Now, what does Chapter 2 of the Nigerian Constitution mandate? It's very similar to all other constitutions I have read of the 190 plus nations who have constitutions. It simply points out that the responsibility of men and women who have the privilege of governing the people of Nigeria is to deliver to them a decent standard of living. That's what Chapter 2 speaks about. That the reason why we are a nation state and we have collectively agreed to work together, live together, and die together as Nigerians, giving power, either executive, legislative, or judicial, to some to govern the state for all of us, is so that all of us residing in this state will have a decent life. Now, the United Nations has done an excellent job in defining what a decent standard of living means. The UNDP Human Development Index is a summary measure of the average achievement in key dimensions of human development of every nation in the world. All it says is that we will measure every nation along a few dimensions. It's not very complex. What are these dimensions? A long and healthy life, knowledge or education, and a decent standard of living. It is a standard means of measuring well-being. It is used to distinguish whether a country is a developed, developing, or underdeveloped country. And it's also used to measure the impact of economic policies on the quality of life. Countries fall into 4 broad categories based on their Human Development Index ranking or rating or score. The categories are very high, high, medium, and low human development. Currently, Seychelles is the only African country that falls into the very high human development category. Somalia has the lowest HDI in both Africa and the world, according to the list. For Nigeria, since 2003, our HDI value has actually improved by about 20%. Our value is currently 0.54. But this places us in a low human development category. And our ranking is currently 161 or thereabouts out of 189, 190 countries.
The baton is passed to the head of civil service, who opines on practical solutions for reform.
Notwithstanding this fundamental objective, I feel it is also very important to understand that reforming a system can be a very daunting task for any individual or institution. In fact, reforms and reformers alike are never popular. Even in the world's most developed countries, challenges that pertain to public sector reform implementation abound. Hence, every system has its own inherent challenges, and it is instructive to point out that there are no infallible systems anywhere in the world. Challenges will eventually arise, and so reform is continuous. As the challenges arise, then we need reform action to deal with those challenges. Over time in Nigeria, reform program implementation has, taken its toll even on governance. And there are quite a number of impediments that successful reform programs always face. I'll just read out a list of them. I'm sure we all know this, but I'll just read the list out. The first is a lack of inclusive implementation strategy framework, poor funding and inadequate budgetary provisions in MDAs to fund the implementation of reforms, lack of skilled manpower, poor communication at planning and implementation stages, poor or total lack of ownership of reforms by subnationals, poor involvement of citizens, lack of synergy between the public and private sector organizations, lack of synergy amongst implementing MDAs, policy somersaults, and rivalry and conflict of interest, even among government institutions. Some others include the lack of political will and ownership to support reform implementation, resistance to change, poor ICT infrastructure, political interferences in bureaucratic processes, dwindling support by partners, a lack of legislation to legalize and institutionalize reforms, lack of institutional capacity, weak governance structures around the reform processes, inadequate follow-through mechanisms for implementation of reforms, and lastly, a lack of shared wisdom, vision on national development, among others.
Those in civil service must be appreciated for their contributions and the need for reform, and other points formed the highlights of the submission of former Minister of Education, Dr. Obi Ezekwesili.
Whether a country be rich or poor, the role of government is consistently about improving the quality of life of the citizens. That's why, the countries with the highest indicators are continually figuring out new ways of doing things. Because that's the raison d'etre, as the French would say, for government being in existence. And so this purpose must be served. And to serve it, we must go a little back in our studies and look at what is it about our politics that trumps, pun intended, everything. What is it about our politics that trumps everything? We need to correct for it. And correcting for our politics, especially at a time of interest in seeing the country be governed better, would require candor. And that candor means that we've got to ask ourselves, what is the philosophy of any reform that we embark on in this country today? Is there a philosophy governing it? I am so glad that a man who used to run the Bureau for Public Services here, I haven't heard anybody mention, Joabak is, yes. There has to be a philosophy underpinning it. What's the philosophy on which Nigeria stands? It's often the case that you need shared vision, or rather, you need shared values. What would you say are the values that we all have agreed to share as a people? Shared values. Then you need a national vision that has been collectively agreed. A national vision. The Minister of Budget might be laughing and saying, I think we're planning on a vision. Hey, but listen to me. A national vision is not planned within the ministry. A national vision is a vision of the collective aspiration of the people of a country. And then third, you need an agreed identity, especially in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multi-plural society. You need a common, an agreed identity so that you don't have these identities that sort of contradict when they should actually cohabit. Being a Christian, being a Yoruba person, being a Nigerian should not be irreconcilable. We should be able to have that sense of a common identity on the basis of which we anchor our national vision and our shared values. Then you have pointed the public service on the direction to build. You can have the public service being given the burden to make the country great when the superstructures go in the opposite direction. That is an unkind expectation. So we do need to correct for this. It's fundamentally my point.
For former President Chief Olusegun Obasanjo, the role the civil service plays in national development is extremely important.
I will continue to respect the Nigerian civil service, public service, particularly the technocrats, until I die. When we were trying to deal with the issue of the last vestiges of decolonization and fighting apartheid, we decided that Britain had responsibility for Rhodesia and had some form of responsibility and influence on South Africa. But how can we push Britain to move on South Africa, Rhodesia? We decided to move on the economic front. And we decided to nationalize, is it 2 or 3? 3 items. And what, fortunately or unfortunately, one member of British Parliament has addressed Nigeria as a toothless bulldog. So that afforded us opportunity to bare our teeth. Previously, I had a study carried out for me by a group of 3 men. What really do we deal with? What do we deal with Britain? And what that came up to is that we put 250,000 men and women in jobs in Britain by the amount of import we got from Britain. 250,000 men and women. So I decided to carry my cabinet, my governors, and my colleagues in the Supreme Military Council. This was when I was military head of state. And to make sure it did not leak, I wrote the memo myself. I called a joint meeting of Supreme Military Council, Council of State, and the Cabinet. On the morning of the meeting, at 8 o'clock, I called Leman Chiroma, who was the head of service and secretary to government. When he read the memo, he took the memo from me. He went to his office, he read it. Within 5 minutes, he came back. He said, "This is hot." I said, "Yes, I know it's hot." He said, "The British will react." I said, "Yes, I know they will." I said, "But by then, the 3 of us, myself, Yakubu Danjuma, and Shehu Yaradua, have had a meeting, and we have decided that was the way we are going." And then Leman Chiroma said, "My advice is that we shouldn't go this way." I said, "Sit down." I said, "We have put our heads together. We have decided that no matter what we are here in Nigeria, for as long as any human being of dark color is regarded as a second citizen anywhere in the world because of his color, then we are second citizen in the world. We will not accept that." And then we took our memo. And then after that, Leman Chiroma said, "Oh, I don't know you have thought of it to that extent. Then we back you up." He took our memo, went, and we carried it unanimously, and the civil service backed us up. We even had what we call Southern Africa Relief Fund, where civil servants contributed 5% of their salary. 5% of their salary. That is what you can get from civil service. That is the type of reform. And they back us up. And it was that reform that made us to stand out And we became, even though in terms of distance, we were far from frontline, we became a frontline state. That's what this reform can do for you.
Two panel sessions made of prominent Nigerians in the public and private sector deliberate on the challenges with the reform and how to address it.
Given what the research has done to tell us where we need to focus, because they did some work on the soft, they call it the soft end, and the hard one. You know, as a student of economics, they used to teach us perfect economics. And as I was leaving school, I went to one of my professors and I said, why are you teaching us perfect when the word is actually oligopoly? Why don't you should have taught us what we would deal with. My point is, haven't identified that, look, what we're facing in Nigeria today is a hard side. I think our focus should be really to deal with the outside. The reasons why reforms have failed in time past is that we recognize that the hard side that they have identified is what operates and what exists. But we pretend that that's not the issue. So once we stop pretending and we focus on what the main issues are, that's all. When I came up here, and the first thing he did was he looked at chapter 2 of the Constitution. That's the first thing he said. Anytime they ask me, sometimes I try to get out of problems. And they say, is government A doing well or Gombe? And I say, what does chapter 2 of our Constitution say? Once you evaluate yourself from that viewpoint, it's easy. And so, whether it is government now, government in the future, what all of us need to ask ourselves is that, are we fulfilling the oath we took? So I think the major thing is that to recognize that we can't tell ourselves lies. We can't hide behind our fingers. The hardcore is the main issue. And to work more on it and see how we need to address it. And it doesn't take a long thing to do. You know what? People just want to have a sense of belonging. They want to feel that, look, everyone, they care for me. You know, I was talking in a group, that's last week, and they were talking about corporate governance and co. And they were bringing the issue, and I said, come, it's about trust. If I trust you, I will follow you. If I don't trust you, I won't follow you. I think we get to a point, if we look at those hard work, how do we make government a lot more trustworthy? How do we make government believable? You know, and you know, they do a lot of work, they struggle, they do everything, and yet people don't believe them. So what do we need to do? So deal with the hard stuff and begin to work on them more as they take the work forward. And I believe that this thing will be a lot easier.
I think one of the takeaways we should leave here with is the fact that we should first learn to trust ourselves. We should look at collaboration rather than competition. And it's the whole of government approach that is going to help us. So we bring the private sector in with their vast experience, with their innovative ideas and technology to help us achieve what we should achieve in terms of initiating a policy, planning it, implementing it, executing it, monitoring and evaluation, and of course having to rethink and have some flexibility about the reforms. And of course for the politicians, they are the representative of the people. They have the heartbeat of the people. They interact with the people. They should know what the people want. And then they come on board with those ideas for us to develop a policy that is going to impact the citizen. And with their presence, coming up with legislative backing, and of course, having the confidence of going back to the people to say that we are doing that which you expect us to do, then we begin to get the trust of the citizen, we get the cooperation of everybody, and I believe we will get reforms that will be long-lasting and sustainable. The civil servants are ready and willing, and as long as we have those collaboration, the skill deficit that we may have in terms of capacity building, in terms of skill acquisition, in terms of efficiency of management of funds, will be brought in by this sector. Till we begin to talk a whole government approach, there is no reform in this country that will be sustainable and that will be impactful to the citizens. So this is the time to have this conversation, and I believe we are here.
Public sector reform as a road that must be traveled is one of the important measures for result-oriented government seems to be a point of convergence in this discourse. Therefore, the consensus seems to be that with the complexities involved in governance, which requires cohesion in the public sector, grounded in a constitution, but amenable to positive change that reflects the direction the people need to go, needs to be aided by reform when necessary. For Special Report, I'm Olumide Macaulay. Thank you for watching.